I'm curious if cold exposure affects milk supply. Has this been discussed before? We'll be diving into this and so much more in today's Q&A episode. So, I have some thoughts about this. As somebody who has done cold exposure I did it all throughout last pregnancy, and then I did do it while breastfeeding Cora. I did not notice any dip in supply personally. Josh, you can kind of weigh in on like the stress and the calories aspect of it, but my thought process is it shouldn't, as long as you're fueling and hydrating optimally. Same with sauna. Like, I get the question about the sauna a lot too, is that, are you seeing a dip in milk supply because you're dehydrating yourself? Well, if you're saunaing, you should be hydrating extra to make up for anything that you lose from that. So with cold exposure specifically, though, I feel like, didn't the guidelines, Joelle, change as far as how you manage like mastitis, and like when you are about to get an
Yeah.
infection due to milk supply, that cold is actually good for that?
Yes. Now it's supposed to be cold and not heat.
Yeah. So I feel like, I mean, I've never experienced a clogged duct or mastitis personally. I have no idea if that's because I did daily cold exposure and kind of helped just keep things at bay. But I know you have, Joelle, and you can speak to that. But I personally don't think it should affect milk supply if all of the other areas are accounted for.
I would say the only place that there maybe could be an issue is if you went, and this is theoretically, but theoretically, what comes to my mind is if you were to go from a cold plunge right into trying to breastfeed, that there may possibly be like a reduction. I wouldn't say an overall supply, but like
In that
amount
session.
secreted in that session, uh, because cold exposure can cause vasoconstriction. And when things constrict, things don't flow. And so that would be my only thought process of maybe not going right from like cold plunge into your breastfeeding session, like be warm going into that session. But I couldn't really imagine it impacting supply entirely.
I mean, I've never noticed a fluctuation in my milk supply. It's always zero, cold exposure or not. But I mean, in theory, it's a big stressor on your body. So it's hormetic stress, it's planned stress, but it is a big stress on your body. And you could be burning more calories. Now, that's debated as far as how significant that is. But if you're already borderline under eating, if you're very stressed, baby's not sleeping, a lot of things are going on in life. That could be something that kind of tips the scales a certain way that could have a negative impact.
So there you have it. That's our thoughts. There's probably not going to be like research and data on this topic just because that's very niche, I think, and cold exposure
Yeah.
is such a new thing. But I mean, it's something you can experiment with. And if you notice a dip in supply and you notice that's the only thing that you changed, then maybe you don't do it while breastfeeding. But it's going to probably be individual, and all the other factors still matter.
And that's a good
Yeah.
point for
I
a
would
quick
say,
tangent. Oh,
yeah.
real quick.
I was
So
also gonna take a quick tangent there. Go ahead.
two quick tangents for you. Whether it's for this or for anything else, if you guys notice a negative or a positive impact with something, make sure you try to keep all the other variables extremely consistent. So don't change two or three things at a time. When I go to add something in, like I want a baseline. So I have a couple things that I want to try that are new, but I'm still feeling funky after being sick. So I don't want to change anything up. I want that steady baseline first. With this, if you want to try to keep doing the cold exposure, like do it for a few weeks. If you notice milk supply is an issue, just stop doing that one thing. Don't try to do that and supplement something else that should help. Take that one thing out, that cold exposure out, and see if you notice an impact on it. Because this way, like you can actually test if you want to keep doing cold exposure and that wasn't the problem, you wouldn't really come to that conclusion if you're swapping out a bunch of different things. Where if you stop doing the cold exposure and you still have that issue, it wasn't the cold exposure.
Yeah, my side rant was going to be similar to that in just not doing too much at once or not removing too much at once. When it really comes to anything, we hear people, Alessandra, say all the time, like, oh, I noticed a dip in my supply when I started exercising. It wasn't, we know like that it was not actually exercise that caused that, but what were you doing alongside exercise? Did you start dieting when you also reintroduced exercise? Did you enter a deficit when you reintroduced exercise? Did you start limiting ultra processed foods more and that put you in a steeper deficit? So you have to kind of look at what you're doing overall. And this might be a side tangent to that, to another side tangent, but I'm just going to run with it anyway, because I think it's relevant. This example, I feel like, is very applicable to something like the carnivore diet, where I have posted about this before. And some people, when they go on the carnivore diet, for instance, they will say, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. My digestive issues are gone. My skin looks better. And it's so hard to say that that is necessarily because of all the meat you're eating, in particular, or because, mainly that, or because you stopped eating vegetables. A lot of times when people start the carnivore diet, they stop eating ultra processed food. They usually end up putting themselves in a deficit. And so now you're losing weight. Was it the carnivore diet making you lose weight? No, it's the fact that you put yourself in a deficit. Are you experiencing less inflammation overall? Yeah, maybe. If you were previously eating foods that didn't really agree with your gut and now you're eliminating those, sure, that could be helpful. Is it inherently the meat, the pounds and pounds of butter and cheese for breakfast? No, not necessarily. There's a multitude of things taking place there. So I just think it's important to highlight that it's very, very easy for us to draw correlations with things, and people can assume that correlation equals causation. But just because you do X and Y happens doesn't actually mean it was just X, if X was actually X, Y, and Z, and now ABC happened. Does that make sense?
Totally. I
Meat
think
and
it's
butter make everything better.
It's just one of those, like, okay, great, you may be feeling better, but is it because you started taking better care of your health? Is it because you started limiting ultra processed foods? Is it because you started eating more protein? Is it because you started eating more fruit? Because those are parts of the carnivore diet as well.
Yep, preach. I think it's all relevant, and that's a great example and tie-in of that example. So I'm glad you guys brought that up. All right, Lucy asked us last week, I find it really hard to take RDLs to failure, feeling it in my glutes. I often find my back is failing before my glutes. Tips. My first instinct, I mean, I'd have to see
go ahead.
it, but my first instinct is that we could tweak something with form, possibly, if you're feeling it more so in your back first. But an RDL isn't primarily glutes either. So you might be feeling it a little bit in your back, and that's, I'd say, somewhat normal. But if it's something like pain, or you feel like something is being tweaked in your back, then I would say it's probably a form issue. What do you guys think?
I would also say too, though, once you start bending that knee a little bit, you are engaging more glute as opposed to a stiff-legged
it depends
deadlift.
how you're
So
doing it.
my thought is, if you're feeling it in your glutes earlier in the set, and then it, like, rotates towards your back towards the end, you're probably losing form. So if you're not bracing properly, if you're not keeping everything engaged, and you're compromising form, like, you're going to immediately shift where the focus is for that movement. So one, make sure that you're either videotaping yourself or figuring out a way to correct form if that is something that's triggering that. And also, I mean, I wouldn't be afraid to shorten range of motion a tiny bit in that regard. Keep it consistent throughout each set so you have the stable baseline as you progress weight. But maybe don't go to the floor every single rep if you notice, you're having a hard time controlling it as you get closer to fatigue. Just shorten that up a little bit.
I would also, she said it was her glutes that are not really fatiguing.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
the
her back.
glutes are not the
Her
limiting
back
factor,
is
like, her back
fatiguing
is the limiting
before.
factor. Yeah.
Yes.
I
Toward
think
the end of did she say toward the
it
end of the
could
set, or
be-
did I make that up?
No, you made that up. Well, she just said, I find it hard taking RDLs to failure.
To fail. Okay, yeah. So that's what I interpreted as.
So a few things. One, I wouldn't really recommend taking RDLs to failure personally.
No.
Like, that's not typically a great exercise to take to failure. It is very, very taxing. It is one of the most like CNS fatiguing exercises. I would typically recommend keeping reps on the lower side for something like RDLs, but I also don't think if it's not form related, and we can rule that out, which of course is a big if, I don't necessarily think it's the worst thing that it's not your glutes that are fatiguing. What that means to me is that your glutes are stronger than what you can lift in an RDL. And so you might feel your lower back and you might feel your hamstrings doing more of the work. And your glutes aren't really hitting that level of fatigue because that position of a hinge isn't as much of a strong lift for you. I'd be very curious if you were to do a barbell hip thrust, what type of weight that would compare. Like I can hip thrust way more than I can deadlift personally. My glutes are a lot stronger in a thrust position and that level of hip extension than in an RDL. So I would just keep that in mind too. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that you're not feeling a ton of fatigue in your glutes. Like I'm thinking about when I do RDLs, I don't really feel like my glutes are super fatigued after an RDL. But I guess if you're also going like, again, super high rep, your spine probably is going to be the limiting factor. Your glutes are a really big muscle.
Throw belts
So
on,
anyway,
belt straps.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I was gonna say. Wrists, my grip would be a limiting factor for sure. But I would say, yeah, maybe your glutes are just stronger than you're giving them credit for, and that's why they're not fatiguing a ton.
All right, next question is from Nicolette. She said, do you ever get confused by your Aura Ring readings, particularly the stress reading? Sometimes I get readings that say I'm stressed all day, LOL, when I most certainly don't feel like I am. Thanks in advance.
So
I feel like
Aura
we answered
Ring,
one like
and
this really similarly, right?
It was similar, but it was slightly different.
It was
I
about
I
believe.
think it was like
the
general.
restorative time. I think it was
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
restorative time on her Aura Ring.
With stress, like I'm in the same boat. You have to remember though, like you don't have to be pissed off to be stressed. Like if you're in an engaged state, Aura Ring considers that stressed. So like if you're working on a project all day, which is our lives right now, we are stressed basically the entire day. Even though it's like it could be good stress, fun stress, but it's still stress. So kind of take that in context, and if you feel okay, like if that's impacting your readiness score because you're constantly engaged all day every day, take that into context and be like, okay, I can push it a little harder than Aura Ring is prompting me to.
Yeah, I would say the only time mine says like, oh, like great job, you got more restorative time than usual is like a day when I'm literally like in pregnancy right now, laying on the couch all day. Like when I have one of those days, it was like, oh, good job, like you restored yourself today. But I literally did nothing, and that's obviously not realistic for every day. So I wouldn't put too much weight into that. Like Josh said, as long as like your readiness is good, you're getting good sleep, you feel like you're managing your stress well. At the end of the day, this is just data from a wearable, and we know that we can't like fully believe or rely on every single aspect of it said to the exact amount. So that's my thought process there. All right. Next question is from Ellie. She said, if we're coming off of a stomach bug but still feeling a tad, and then she put like a little like sad confused face, are we doing ourselves a disservice by sticking to bland carbs? Having a really hard time eating protein as it just sounds awful, even though it's not actually upsetting my tummy, both myself and my small kiddos. Thoughts?
I think when it comes to being sick, it's one of those like do what you can when you can. If you can't stomach getting like a piece of chicken down, or that sounds just absolutely nauseating to you, like can you get down a piece of cheese? Can you get down a whey protein shake? And if you still don't have the appetite for it, I'm sure it'll be a few days and then that will pass and you'll get back into the routine. So I'm team do what you can when you can, get down what you can when you can. And hopefully things will mitigate as time goes on.
Also think about how you're making this stuff. Like if it's just a plain ass piece of chicken seasoned and thrown on the grill, like I hate that, period. I never want that. One thing we've been using as a go-to is just taking Bell and Evans, the chicken, the tenders, like where they actually fillet the breast, then slice them. They're so good. I just throw them in some breadcrumbs, throw them in some buffalo sauce, and like just make healthy buffalo wings, and they're not wings, buffalo tenders, and I could eat that like 3 times a day.
All right, Bailey asked us, have you ever observed or experienced clients who find it difficult to sleep when slightly restricting their calories? And then Paige also commented below that she's in deficit and her sleep and energy have been sucky last week. So good question. Yes, I would say we probably have seen this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say it's commonly looked at when it comes to biofeedback. I'd be very curious how long Bailey has been in a deficit. A lot of times, you might, I'd be curious if she was noticing like right at the start of a deficit versus like, hey, I've been in a deficit for 6, 9, 12 months and now biofeedback is like not in a super great place. It could be a sign that you potentially need a diet break, need to hop back up to maintenance for a little bit. But it's definitely not uncommon that a deficit can affect your sleep quality.
For sure. So pay attention to meal spacing and like, are you getting enough towards the end of the day? So is dinner like I've got 30 calories left and it's like a little snack because you've been really consistent. Everything Joelle said, but just focusing on satiety. So even in a deficit, like you can load up on voluminous foods that don't have a ton of calories, berries, cauliflower rice, spinach, like one big salad. And then just, again, making sure you're getting, a protein, carb, and fat toward the end of the day to keep those blood sugars stable and avoid that, tank in blood sugars where you're just very uncomfortable before bed, because that's going to make it much more difficult to sleep, obviously.
Yeah, for those who are new listening, or maybe they haven't heard us talk about it in a while, as coaches, we have our clients track all of these things. So we're looking at how much sleep they're getting per night, what the quality looked like. We're looking at their daily energy levels. We're looking at their overall hunger, on top of obviously what their total intake was as far as calories, macros, fiber, what their cycles look like. Like, it's going to shift a little bit for each client, but these are all things that we really pay attention to with our clients. And when we see things dip, or when we see things sort of negatively impacting that client's life in a pretty significant way, that's typically when we will pull back and do a diet break or hop to maintenance, or, depending on the situation, implement something. But I just wanted to throw that out there, that if you're in a fat loss phase and you're in a deficit and you're not paying attention to these things and paying attention to them more than just like, oh, how did I sleep last week? Just kind of going off mentally, like actually track it for a little bit and make sure you're doing things as optimally as you can, not only to get the best result with your fat loss phase, but to feel as best as you can in that fat loss phase too. That is something that really matters to us as coaches, is that you feel good or feel as good as you can while still seeing the results that you want to see.
Side note, and another consideration that kind of brings us back to what we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, doing multiple things at the same time and then assuming it's one thing. So my other kind of follow-up question to that would be, you mentioned that you're restricting your calories right now. Is there anything else that you've changed that could also be making it difficult to sleep? For instance, if we're in a calorie deficit, we might feel more tired or more fatigued. So maybe we're having that, second cup of afternoon coffee, and it could be that that's interfering with your sleep. So just kind of bringing it back to, hey, it could absolutely be the deficit, but is there something else that we've maybe added or changed while we're in that deficit? It could be a supplement that you're taking at night that's keeping you awake, or, an afternoon coffee because you've been more fatigued. Is there anything else that has changed before you necessarily say it must be the deficit?
Good points. Okay, last one from last week, then we'll get to this week's questions. Paige asked us, I know smartwatches aren't completely accurate, but I feel like my heart rate doesn't get very high when lifting, and I think I'm hitting the designated RPE. Am I not working hard enough, or should I not pay too much attention to this? I also run, so my endurance cardio health is decent. Thank you.
Yeah, your heart rate's irrelevant for RPE.
I would say I would not worry about your heart rate during lifting.
Doesn't matter. In fact, if it is getting too high during lifting, you probably need to do more cardio, but
we'd be telling, yeah. Right. We'd be telling you to do
you're
more
doing
cardio.
Enough. Yeah. Don't stress it.
Cardio squats.
All right. Moving on to this week's questions. Tyla asked us, she said, I signed up for my second half marathon. It's 16 weeks away in Mystic, Connecticut. Yay. I've been using the Evolve Hybrid program. I see that you recommend pairing the Move program with the running programs. What are everyone's thoughts on doing that, or subbing the runs in the hybrid program for the running program, the half program in her case. I'd be trying the Evolve half and hybrid. Thoughts? I've been loving the hybrid training and I'm hesitant to switch it up. Yeah, I think that's fine. We only paired the shorter distance run program with hybrid because most people are still getting into running and not really at that half level yet. So it's more of like a general recommendation. But if you are obviously training for a half, you want to follow that program. So totally continue following hybrid and then just add in the half run program with that. If that makes sense.
Extend is the 10K, right?
Yeah. Okay, Melissa said, I've outgrown / am outgrowing dumbbells. She has adjustable dumbbells up to 50 pounds, especially lower body. What would you recommend as the next piece of gym equipment? My current bench is adjustable, but it does not include any attachments. Thanks.
I would find a cheap rack and a barbell if you can swing it. A rack, you can get a decent rack for, I mean, when we did it was a few $100, it might be 400-ish now. But that barbell and you're really leveling up that gym game. If you don't have room for that, then I would just scale up the adjustable dumbbells. So they have sets like Iron Master, which can go up to 160 pounds. There's different add-on kits. So just based on the threshold that you need, just keep adding to the collection. So build up that dumbbell set a bit further, or it's time for a rack.
Also, one other thing that you could kind of exhaust, not an equipment piece, but she mentioned specifically lower body. She's like, I'm progressing past what I have. You can be incorporating more unilateral work, so one-sided work. You might find that, you make things more difficult if you're doing a single leg squat or a Bulgarian split squat, or doing something B stance RDL versus, both bilateral. So just another tactic that you could try to implement to buy you a little bit more time. But yeah, I would say either dumbbell extension packs or a barbell and a rack would be my next go.
You could even get the barbell without the rack and just get a couple bumper plates with it if you don't have room for a rack, or if you can't afford the rack like that. That can be an easy way to get more weight without having the actual rack. Okay, Danielle asked us, this has likely been coveted.
Covered.
I was going to say that must be a typo. But how long after a stall on the scale should macros be adjusted? I know I should be taking measurements, but I haven't. Should I do that first and monitor if there's a change for a few weeks and then reevaluate?
Yes. You cannot say that I have stalled in progress, maybe on the scale, yes, but you can't say that you've stalled in progress if you don't have other measurements outside of the scale.
Or progress photos or something like that.
I would say progress photos and measurements should be your next step. And I would want to see like 2 to 4 weeks of consistency within programming and nutrition and taking all of those measurements and pictures and scale weight. And then still, if nothing has changed at that point, then I would adjust. But I would say 2 to 4 weeks minimum.
And an easy reference point to add to that as well is, how are those lifts progressing? If you're maintaining weight and getting stronger, there's a very strong likelihood that you're actually improving body composition. So whether you're taking those measurements, the progress pictures or not now, you can reflect on that data if you've been tracking your workouts and say, all right, am I getting stronger? If I am, good things are probably still happening.
Sarah asked us, how do you navigate when you and your partner have very different routines? My boyfriend and I just moved in together and I'm struggling with our nighttime and morning rituals clashing. I've been trying to clean up my nighttime routine, trying to put my phone away, journal, read, dim lights, be in bed by 8:39. I wake up at 4:30 most mornings and I work out at 5. Then try to implement a quiet, slow morning. Again, no phones, eating a balanced meal, journaling before going to work. Props to you. That is an epic evening and morning routine that you're trying to get to. But then she said, I'm getting frustrated how much I notice he is on his phone. He's blasting podcasts. The first thing he does is reach for his phone in the morning. Not only do I want to be able to keep my rituals, but I would also like him to clean up and find a routine. I know how harmful the phones and stimulation can be before bed and first thing when you wake up. Any suggestions? My first thing I will say is you can't force someone to do something. As much as you would love for him to be on the same page as you, if he does not want to, nothing you do or say is going to have him do that. With that, you can continue to lead by example and continue to just like nonchalantly say and mention like how much these things are helping you feel really good and like just expressing how they're helping you, but you cannot force somebody to do anything. So as hard as that is, and I know as frustrating as it is to hear, that's just how the cookie crumbles. But I think, I mean, it's kind of hard when you're living with someone, but it sounds like you've got a good groove as far as like what you are doing. So as long as it's not like directly
Disturbing.
impacting you, I would say that it's just going to have to be something that you accept for the current period until he does express interest or things shift a little bit.
Yeah, that's the key factor there. It's if it's affecting you, have the conversation. If it's not, like, that's not really your place.
Yeah, I agree. I think lead by example. Like there are plenty of things just even in our own marriage where like I started doing something and Brant was like, oh, I think I'm going to do that too. Or like Brant started doing something. I was like, oh, okay, I kind of want to do that too. So continuing to lead by example, but if something like he wakes up and he's blasting his podcasts and like you're trying to journal and like that's kind of impacting your routine, I think it's worth a conversation.
Yeah, for sure. How many times have I copied Josh? I think cold exposure, meditation.
All the
What an
times.
inspo. What an inspiration, Josh.
My personal
I am
fitfluencer.
I am technically Fit Girl Moves.
Okay. Anyway, next question is from Hannah. She said, I need help with getting my protein in during pregnancy when I have no appetite. I'm 14 weeks. So she's just out of the
I am
first
the queen of no
trimester.
appetite recommendations.
Go ahead, Joelle.
So one, she mentioned that she's 14 weeks pregnant. So I don't know if
Yeah.
she has like no appetite because she's nauseous or if she's having like protein aversions. I got really, really bad like protein source aversions, like could not get down chicken, or turkey or fish. Like my first, I would say it's like 20 weeks of pregnancy. I was totally fine with red meat though, for some strange reason. So A, context dependent based on like, is it nausea? Is it protein aversions entirely? If you can get down a protein shake, that would be a really great, easy, convenient way to just throw back a scoop of protein. I'm not going to lie. I survived on like turkey bacon and grapes for the first 20 weeks of my pregnancy. Salty meat, I was like fine with. So I would like have a ton of turkey bacon. And lots of protein shakes. I was fine with like yogurt, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, protein shakes, string cheese, and beef was fine. So like meatloaf, meatballs, steak, that stuff all felt great. For me, it was like chicken and turkey that I could not stomach. So I do think you have a lot of options. If you can get down a shake, like a whey protein shake, that's always just super easy, convenient, cost effective to get in a scoop of protein that way. Eggs, hit or miss, depending on how you cook them. Sometimes, I don't know if you guys get this, but I get like the egg icks sometimes. And I'm like, I can't look at scrambled eggs. And then other times I'm like, yeah, I'm going to make scrambled eggs today. So eggs were hit or miss with me during pregnancy. But I would say, if you are fine with dairy and you could stomach dairy, I would say that was like a big part of my protein consumption during
Yeah.
pregnancy.
Lean into what sounds good. Even if you have to have the same thing multiple times per day, like that's okay. You don't have to have a different protein source at every meal or every snack. Like if you find something you can eat and that sounds good, just eat more of that thing. But with appetite too, I mean, if you obviously more context needed here, but like a lot of people struggle during the first trimester to eat anything and then they feel like they have no appetite. Like your body's going to adapt based on what you're eating and what you're giving it. So if you haven't eaten super high calories for a few weeks or a few months, it's going to take time for that appetite to come back. But the quickest way to do that is to get food in, and then it will hopefully adjust. It should adjust, especially as you start growing this human a little bit more. Okay, Samantha said, I'm new to the app. I'm on my 3rd week. I've been loving it, but I feel I've been more injury prone since starting. My question is, should I be trying to increase weights every single week? I've been making small jumps, but now I'm second guessing if that is best. I do get a good warm-up in, including 2 to 3 minute row and the mobility movements. I also do warm-up sets prior to the bigger lifts. For context, I've been lifting for years through CrossFit and Peloton app. I also run and cycle every week for cardio. My sleep isn't great, but that is my season of life with littles. I do work out in the morning and sleep is sacrificed. I'm a nurse practitioner working full-time, so high-stress job life, high stress at home. Also, with being injured, should I continue on with the app as planned and just do the movements I can and not push through the pain, or take a break and start over in a week or 2? Thanks for all of your knowledge you drop every week.
Those are all the questions I was going to ask as far as recovery. So not sleeping great, high stress job. I would say like you might have to take a little time to recover, but from a general sense, to avoid this going forward, you just really have to figure out how much volume you can handle at this point in time. So if that's taking an extra rest day, and a lot of people, I don't know if this is controversial, but a lot of people don't realize like programs are written on a 7-day basis, like day 1, 2, 3, 4 over the course of the next 7 days. It is not the end of the world, and your body probably isn't going to notice a difference if you're doing a 4-day per week program over the course of 10 days. So if you have to space in a couple extra rest days, or scale volume back, like drop it to 2 sets for these exercises for the time being, just you'll find you're recovering better. You're also able to bring up the intensity a bit further, so strength might progress even better, and you shouldn't be noticing as many of these nagging injuries throughout. But I would just say, rather than take a step back, I would just say focus on the recovery and adding as many aspects as you can, and readjust that volume threshold / rest days, and you'll be in a much better spot.
Yeah, I love that she provided all that context, because we would have all been saying our follow-up questions would have been like, how's sleep? How's stress? Are you doing cardio too? And she obviously works full-time. She's got a background with CrossFit and Peloton. She runs, she cycles. She didn't say which app program she's doing, but is she doing a 3-day-a-week program? Is she doing a 5 or 6-day-a-week program? I think that makes a difference. But when we start to have all those nagging injuries, the 2 questions that come up for me is, how much are we eating and how well are we recovering? Because those nagging injuries and feeling like you're injury prone, that's just a big sign of under recovery. And under recovery is either poor sleep and or too much volume and intensity relative to our recovery time, and or not enough calories to assist with recovery. Or maybe it's both of those. If you've got littles and you're stressed and you're exercising a ton, maybe you too struggle with appetite. But I would say first things to look at is just recoverability, which is going to be sleep and calories, and just overall training volume. And you may need to lower your volume or training frequency in this season of life.
I agree too. And the only other thing I wanted to add on is that at the end there, she was like, should I just stop for a week or 2 and then pick it back up? There are very few instances, even in someone who gets an injury, like a more serious injury, where I would say, do not exercise. We never want to take like a full 2 weeks off just because we're having trouble recovering. Like typically we want to reduce that volume or try to focus on recovery methods, but exercise is only going to help us, especially in a season where you are stressed and where you are just feeling all these things. So I would refrain from doing that, because then you're going to start back up again. And if you start back up again at the same volume without changing anything, you're just going to find yourself back at square one. So take Josh's and Joelle's advice. Decrease volume, make sure you're not doing too much, but just scaling back a little bit and making sure you're taking enough rest days with everything else. I guarantee that will help tremendously.
Yeah, I would say the goal is to deload, not to detrain.
Yes. Okay, last question from Letitia. I hope I'm saying her name right. Wait, she always asks questions, great questions. Let us
Correct us
know
if
if we're,
not, because I know
yeah,
I know two different names spelled that way, and one is Leticia. One goes by Leticia, and one goes by Letitia. So
yeah.
correct us if we're wrong. Tell us
Do
which
that.
one it is for you.
Do that spelling pronunciation breakdown in the next Q&A.
Yeah, like
When
the
you ask your
phonetic
next
spelling.
question.
Yep.
Yeah.
But her question was curious to hear how you manage to prioritize alone time with your spouse for yourself, cleaning slash mom stuff while still prioritizing sleep. A 7:30 bedtime doesn't work for our family, so we usually get our little one down. We don't usually get our little one down until 8:30 or 9. Wow, I cannot talk today. Which leaves us with very little time. So we're in a unique scenario where we're up each other's butts 24/7. um, so I would say, it's different. Like we live different lifestyles, but
At the same time, there's a large portion where we are living parallel lives. Like we're together, but
yeah,
we're not together. It's constant mom, dad, work mode. So, I mean, to the same extent, whether we're working from home together or in different areas, it is still very difficult to find that alone time in this phase of life. And like that might be watching a couple episodes of a show before bed and not talking, but just being next to each other because we have nothing left. And that's sometimes that fills the cup. Trying to be better about date night. Obviously, that's going to be a lot more difficult when number 3 comes here in the next couple weeks. So it's just doing what you can to manage that relationship and like be there for each other. But at the same, like being together is not the same as spending time together. It's
yeah, no, I
two things to
agree.
be very cognizant of.
And she also said like alone time, like self-care time and spouse time, which when you add in all these things, like, yeah, there is not many hours left in the day when you have littles for your self-care alone time and spousal alone time. I agree with that though. And I think you kind of just have to be creative too, like during the season of life that you're in, where if it is super busy and you have limited time, like maybe it's like when you used to keyword write my little mirror notes in the bathroom, like that
I
just made
forgot
me
that
feel
I forgot that marker existed, to be honest with you.
Passive aggressive. Hint, hint, wink, wink.
and but like just you writing me a cute little note on my mirror every day like made me smile and made me feel more connected to you. So like you can get
See, there was
creative.
there was rare positive reinforcement upon that. So,
Oh, we're not going to get into a
you
whole
want someone to do
therapy
something,
session on
you
here.
positively reinforce the action.
But my point was there are options as far as like what that looks like. I feel like a lot of us think it has to be like this date night out with no kids and like this extensive thing when in reality there's a lot of other little things you can do throughout the day to like connect. That was my point.
Was it?
Joelle.
Yeah, I mean, I get this. The just person in me that questions everything is like, she mentioned like 7:30 bedtime doesn't work for our family. I don't know how old her kids are. They might be like, we've had the conversation over like bigger kids and them being in sports late at night and they're not home until, 8 o'clock and they still first have to eat dinner and things like that. And like part of it, on one hand, yes, obviously you do your best to find those little moments and those little, bids for connection and stuff. But she was saying in her comment, like 7:30 bedtime doesn't work for us. So like, okay, if that doesn't work for you, like that's something's got to give. Like, I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just kind of like, if that's the choice or the need, like we can't do that, then the compromise is, hey, that might cut into spousal time. So like you'll have to potentially find that somewhere else. Any choice that we make like that, like something's got to give. There's obviously a benefit to keeping your kids up till 8:30, 9 o'clock. Maybe your spouse doesn't get home from work till late. I mean, I can empathize with that. Brant walks in at 6:45. The girls go down at 7. They get 15 minutes with dad. Could we push bedtime to 8:30 or to 8 instead of 7, and then Brant gets the extra time with them? Yes. The compromise would be that we don't get as much spousal time. So it's kind of like we choose the compromise personally, and I'm not saying this is the right way, but we choose the compromise of our girls going down our girls going down earlier, but they see less dad Monday through Thursday, but we get more spousal time Monday through Thursday. So I think it's just being aware of like, you maybe do or don't have a choice depending on your circumstance, but just understanding that like whichever one you choose, there is compromise. Like we put our kids to bed earlier, but like that compromises Brant's time with the girls. But like that's the compromise that we're willing to do because that's what works better for our family. So I mean that in a way of like, if that's working for you guys, like by all means, there's just always a compromise. Like, yeah. That's my
And that's true of anything. Anything you're trying to implement, any new habit, any new hobby, any new personal development, any new whatever, that time has to come from somewhere else. So either you have to get better with your time management and make sure that you're finding time that previously was just hidden. It was there, but it was just hidden. Or you take some of these lesser things, lesser importance, or just lesser priorities and shift them around, move them around to make more time for the higher priorities. And I'm not saying your kids going to bed is a higher or lower priority. I'm just saying in a general sense, whatever you're trying to apply that's new, it comes from somewhere else.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was the last of our questions today.
cool.
That's it.
That's it.
That's all we got.
That's all we got.
Where can they find you?
I'm at Alessandra Skutnik.
At Joelle Samantha.
At Josh Skutnik.
Everything else you need is linked in the show notes.